I didn't expect to be seen that night. Not really. I didn't wear anything too eye-catching, and I certainly wasn't trying to turn heads. I'd tied my hair up in a loose bun, pulled a simple navy blue dress from the back of my closet. One that was modest enough for a wedding but comfortable enough to chase after toddlers, and slipped on flats. Not heels. Flats. Because I was there to help, not shine. And that, I think, was my first mistake. The reception hall shimmered with soft golden light as guests trickled in, laughing and sipping champagne. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and a slow jazz band played a romantic tune while waiters passed hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. It was beautiful, the kind of event you'd see on a wedding planner's Instagram or pinned to a dream board. But from the moment I stepped into that hall, child on one hip and diaper bag on the other, I felt it. That subtle, cutting glance from people who saw me but didn't see me. "Over there, hun," said one of the bride's cousins, gesturing toward a corner by the catering station without making eye contact. "The kids' stuff is all set up. That's your area." My area. As if I had a designated space like the band or the bartender. I nodded politely, forcing a smile. I didn't want to make a scene. Not when this day meant so much to Daniel. Not when it was supposed to be perfect. The little ones swarmed me instantly. Flower girls in frilly tulle dresses, a ring bearer in suspenders and a clip-on bow tie already stained with juice, and the younger siblings of the bridal party. Fussy, restless, sugar high. I had a backpack full of emergency snacks, coloring, books, and wipes, and I moved like clockwork, making sure their chaos didn't spill into the event. I kept them from crying during speeches, helped fix hair clips, distracted them from pulling on tablecloths. I made myself invisible so the family wouldn't have to worry, but every now and then, someone would say it. "Where's the babysitter? Has the sitter eaten yet? Can you tell the sitter to take them outside for a bit?" And each time, my name disappeared a little more. I became a role, a utility, a moving shadow in soft shoes and a wrinkled dress. My name is Maya, by the way. Not that anyone used it that day, except Daniel, but we'll get to that later. I wasn't hired. I wasn't even supposed to be on duty. I was there because Rachel, Daniel's sister, my best friend since middle school, asked me if I'd help keep the kids calm during the wedding. "Just during the ceremony," she had said. "Maybe an hour tops. We just need a calm, familiar face. You're amazing with them. I'll make sure you get a seat and food and everything. Promise." But that promise vanished the moment the photographer started snapping bridal portraits. Rachel barely looked at me. Her mother, who used to call me sweetheart and hug me during Christmas dinners, now treated me like the help. No warmth, just commands delivered with a tight smile and a sharp edge. I told myself they were just stressed, caught up in wedding day chaos. I told myself not to take it personally, but the ache in my chest grew heavier with every hour. Still, I stayed. I stayed when the flower girl's bow came undone minutes before walking down the aisle and no one else knew how to tie it right. I stayed when the ring bearer cried because he thought he lost the fake ring and I had to kneel in my dress to calm him down. I stayed when the bride tripped in the hallway and I helped her fix her heel with a spare bobby pin and some luck. She didn't even thank me. She just said, "God, what would we do without a sitter?" and laughed with her bridesmaids. They laughed too. I remember standing by the kids' table during dinner, balancing a plate on my lap because there weren't enough chairs. I hadn't been given a name card. No one had even asked if I'd eaten. My plate came from a sympathetic waiter who whispered, "Take it before they see me." I thanked him, my voice too soft, and sat next to the youngest flower girl who had just spilled apple juice on her dress. That's when it happened. The brides. Mother, elegant in silver silk and pearls, walked by, chatting loudly with some distant aunt I didn't recognize. She paused, tilted her head toward me, and said with mock surprise, "Oh, I thought she was just the babysitter." Her voice was sugary, fake, and loud enough to cut through the clinking of silverware. Laughter followed, light, careless, dismissive. Smiled. I smiled because it was the only weapon I had. I smiled because if I didn't, the sting would show. I felt like a child again, invisible at the grown-ups' table, waiting to be acknowledged for more than just being helpful. My heart pounded. My palms sweated. I wanted to walk out of that hall. I wanted to call Rachel, drag her into a hallway, and ask her if this was really who they were. But I didn't, because the little ones still needed me, and because I couldn't ruin the night, not over my hurt feelings. That's what I told myself. I didn't know Daniel had heard. I didn't know he was standing behind the curtain, waiting for his cue to make the toast. I didn't know his eyes had found me a dozen times that night, watching me comfort his nieces, clean up a spill, take care of everything no one else wanted to handle. I didn't know that behind that smile he wore for the camera, something in him was boiling. But I would find out soon. Very soon. At that moment, all I knew was the weight of 1,000 quiet humiliations, stacked like bricks in my chest. All I knew was the echo of laughter that made me feel small. I sat in that corner with a juice box and a half-eaten dinner, wondering how I had gone from being Rachel's best friend to being the invisible babysitter at her brother's wedding, and still, I stayed. I didn't sleep much that night after the wedding. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, still hearing her voice echo in my head. I thought she was just the babysitter. Words that shouldn't have mattered, shouldn't have lingered like smoke. But they did. They clung to every part of me that had tried so hard to be useful, helpful, worthy. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. It didn't happen all at once, the slow unraveling of how they saw me. It started months before the wedding, when Rachel first mentioned that her brother was getting engaged. I remember the exact text. Guess what? Daniel proposed. OMG, I can't believe my little brother's getting married. I replied instantly, excited for her, excited for them. I had known Daniel since we were both awkward teens. He used to tease us when we had sleepovers, but in a protective big brother kind of way. He was kind, grounded, the type of guy who always stayed back to help clean up after a party, even when no one asked. Over the years, Daniel and I had shared a quiet bond, born more from familiarity than friendship, but there was a gentleness in our connection that I never really named. We weren't close, not like Rachel and me, but he always greeted me like I mattered. At family gatherings, he'd make sure I had a drink, a plate, a chair. I thought maybe it was just how he was, raised, but now I wonder if it was something else. Rachel and I had been best friends since middle school. We were inseparable, matching backpacks, inside jokes, endless FaceTime calls late into the night. Her family became my second family. I was at every Thanksgiving, every Sunday BBQ, every random Tuesday dinner when my own house felt too quiet. Her parents were warm, doting, the kind of people who gave bear hugs and made you take home leftovers in Tupperware. I used to believe they loved me like a daughter, but things began to change when we graduated college. Rachel moved across the country for work and started building a new life. We texted less, called occasionally. I stayed back in our hometown, working part-time jobs, finishing school, and watching over my younger siblings while my single mom juggled 2 jobs. I didn't envy Rachel. Her world was faster, shinier, more glamorous. But sometimes I wondered if she still thought of me, as the girl who'd slept on her bedroom floor, whispering dreams into the dark. When the wedding planning began, Rachel called me out of the blue one afternoon. Her voice was familiar, sweet, full of excitement. "I have a huge favor to ask," she said. I smiled. It felt like old times. She explained how Daniel and his fiancée were doing a family-centered wedding. Lots of kids in the ceremony, flower girls, ring bearers, nieces and nephews running around. "It's going to be chaos," she laughed. And I just thought, maybe you could help with the little ones. You're so good with them, Maya. Seriously, everyone trusts you. There was no mention of payment, and I didn't ask. We'd always helped each other out. I'd braided Rachel's hair for prom. She'd sat with me at the hospital when my mom broke her wrist. This was what friends did. "Of course," I said. "Anything you need." She promised I'd be treated like a guest, that I'd have a seat at the reception, that I'd be part of the wedding party in spirit. "You'll be more than help," she said. "You're family." I believed her. In the weeks that followed, I helped with flower arrangements, attended 2 kids' fittings for dresses and suits, and even stayed up late one night helping Rachel sort through her seating chart. Not once did I complain. Not once did I ask for credit. I just showed up, again and again, like I always had. The week of the wedding, I started to feel the shift. Rachel's messages became shorter, more direct. Her mom, who used to hug me hello, simply nodded when I arrived at the rehearsal dinner. I was assigned to wrangle the kids during the walkthrough, make sure they didn't knock over floral columns or trip on the aisle runner. I was barely acknowledged afterward. Then came the wedding day. I arrived early, as asked, dressed modestly, but neatly. I helped the little girls get ready, curled their hair, tied their shoes, soothed them through stage fright. Rachel was in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids, sipping champagne. I poked my head in once to let her know the hi. Kids were ready, but she barely looked up. "Oh, great," she said, distracted. "Thanks, Maya. Could you also make sure they don't eat too much candy before pictures?" I nodded. No hug, no warmth. It was then that I realized something. I was only visible when I was useful. The warmth I remembered wasn't here anymore. In its place was expectation, assumption, entitlement. I wasn't Maya, the best friend, the girl who knew her secrets, her heartbreaks, her dreams. I was a body to manage chaos. I didn't cry. Not then. I moved through the day like a ghost, blending into corners, cleaning up unnoticed messes, calming tantrums with practiced hands. I watched the ceremony from the very back, holding the flower girl's hand as she picked her nose and asked why people kiss at weddings, and then came the reception, where the weight of it all finally crushed me. No seat, no name card, no glance of acknowledgement, just that one cutting sentence from the bride's mother, and the laughter that followed like a slap in a silent room. I felt like I was unraveling. Everything I'd done, everything I'd been, dismissed with a single careless sentence. And still, I stayed. Because deep down, even though it hurt, I couldn't bring myself to walk away from Rachel. Or from Daniel, who had always been kind, always treated me with a quiet respect. I didn't know where I stood in their world anymore, but I stayed, because sometimes love doesn't walk away, even when it's being ignored. That night, long, after the reception had ended and the decorations had been taken down, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the soft light of my bedside lamp. I replayed the day over and over, the way people looked through me, the way my name was never spoken. I thought about Rachel's promises, her words, "You're more than help." And I wondered if she even remembered saying them. But the memory that stood out the clearest, the one that returned like a whisper on a loop, was Daniel. The way he had looked at me once during dinner. Just a second, just long enough for our eyes to meet. There was something in his expression, something unreadable. Regret, guilt, rage? I hadn't known then that he'd heard everything. I hadn't known that his silence wasn't ignorance, it was gathering. He was watching, listening, waiting, and the next time he would speak, the entire room would stop breathing. The first time I realized something was about to happen was when Daniel stepped onto the stage. He looked different. Not in the way a man looks when he's finally married, but in the way someone looks when they've made up their mind to break something, gently, beautifully, but completely. There was a calmness to him, yes, but underneath it was this weight, this quiet fire I couldn't name. He adjusted the microphone like it was second nature, smiling at the crowd, and I could see the room settle. Wine glasses paused midair, murmurs quieting into hushes. "Good evening," he began, his voice even, warm. "First, let me say thank you all for being here tonight. It means everything to me and—" He hesitated, just a second. "To us." He glanced toward the head table where his new bride, Amelia, beamed at him, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Her hand was laced with his, or had been. He slowly slipped it free. "We've had such a beautiful day," Daniel continued, his eyes scanning the room, "and I've been blessed to celebrate it with the people I love most. Family, friends, people who've stood by me, supported me, believed in me, and people who've quietly carried more than their share, without ever asking for thanks." The word struck something deep in me. It was subtle at first, like a far-off echo, I didn't know whether to look at him or look away. The kids were dozing off now, clustered on blankets in the corner where I'd built a makeshift play area out of spare cushions and chair covers. I stood against the far wall, still half invisible, still trying to decide if I belonged at all. But Daniel's eyes flicked toward me. And this time they stayed. "There's a lot that goes into making a day like this happen," he said, voice steady. "And while the bride and groom often get the spotlight, there are people behind the scenes who give their time, their energy, their hearts, without expecting anything in return." The crowd stirred, unsure where he was going. Laughter tittered in small pockets. Amelia tilted her head, confused, a flicker of uncertainty passing through her smile. Daniel didn't flinch. "I want to take a moment to thank someone who's been overlooked tonight. Someone who was treated like staff when she was supposed to be a guest. Someone who was promised inclusion but got isolation. Someone who held this wedding together more than anyone knows." I stopped breathing, and then Daniel spoke my name, Maya. He said it slowly, like it deserved space. And suddenly, every eye turned. "She's been called the babysitter tonight," Daniel said, smiling, but not the happy kind of smile. But what she really was the one person who didn't forget why we're here, to take care of one another, to love without conditions, to step up even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unrewarded. I wanted the floor to swallow me. I wanted to hide. But something rooted me to that spot. Something inside me, anger, pride, shock, I don't know, refused to let me disappear again. Daniel's voice deepened. "She didn't just manage the kids. She soothed nerves, saved the flower girl's dress, helped Amelia fix her heel, kept things running so the rest of us could enjoy this day, and she was treated like a background prop." Now the laughter was gone. The room was dead quiet. Tonight I realized something. You can plan every detail. You can book the venue, hire the band, serve 5-star food, but if you don't know how to treat people with dignity, none of it matters. He stepped down from the stage. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to move, to run, but he kept walking, straight toward me. Daniel stood in front of me, and for the first time all night, everyone watched me. "I see you, Maya," he said softly. "And I'm sorry no one else did." My mouth opened, but no words came. Amelia stood now, too, slowly approaching us from the head table. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between confusion and fury. The room buzzed with tension, unspoken questions swelling in every breath. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp, brittle. Daniel turned toward her. "This is me saying I won't start a new life by pretending everything is fine. You heard your mother tonight. I did too." Amelia blinked. It was a joke. No, it was a message. One Maya's heard all her life, from people who think kindness equals weakness and that being helpful makes you disposable. He looked at her. Really looked. "I don't want to build a marriage on silence, or cruelty." The murmurs began, like thunder before a storm. Someone dropped a fork. Somewhere a child cried out. "Daniel," Amelia hissed, stepping closer. "You're embarrassing us." "I'm setting a boundary," he said, firm. "If you can't apologize to Maya tonight, I don't want to go on a honeymoon tomorrow." The words exploded like glass shattering in the quiet. Gasps. Audible. Real. Amelia. Flushed red. "You can't be serious." "I am." Dead silence. I wanted to melt into the floor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull Daniel aside and beg him to stop making a scene for me. For me. But before I could move, Rachel stood up. "I think you owe her more than an apology," she said. I turned. Rachel, my Rachel, was trembling. I hadn't even seen her rise. She stepped forward, shame and regret written all over her face. "Maya," she whispered, "you were my best friend, and I treated you like a convenience. I let my family disrespect you. I let myself forget who you are." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, I didn't believe it. Couldn't. but she stepped closer and pulled me into a hug that was real. Tight, shaky, tear-soaked. "I thought I outgrew our friendship," she said, in my ear. "But the truth is, I outgrew the version of myself who knew how to love properly." And for the first time that night, I cried. Tears I'd held in all day. Pain I didn't know I still carried. Shame that hadn't been mine to hold but had. Stuck to me anyway. I cried into her shoulder and she didn't let go. Not right away. Not until Daniel gently touched my arm. When I looked at him, his eyes were soft. "I don't want to build a life with someone who can't see the people who make that life possible," he said. "And if that makes me dramatic, so be it." Amelia turned, walked away, heels clicking like gunshots across marble. She didn't come back, and somehow, that was okay. The rest of the night was a blur. People came to apologize. Strangers introduced themselves like I'd just arrived. Waiters brought me champagne. Rachel's father offered to drive me home himself. The air had changed, cracked wide open. But nothing compared to Daniel, standing beside me as if he always had. "You're not. Just help," he said once more. "You never were." And this time, I believed it. It's strange how one moment, one sentence, can cleave your life into a before and an after. Before the wedding, I lived quietly in the shadows. Not unhappily, but unassumingly. I helped. I made things easier for other people. I was the kind of girl who stayed late to clean up but never got mentioned in the thank you speeches. I didn't need to be seen, or so I thought. But after Daniel's speech, after the silence that fell over that golden hall, after the room turned toward me instead of away, I couldn't go back to who I was. Something shifted. Something cracked open, not painfully, but with the aching relief of a wound finally breathing. And in the days that followed, I realized something even more unexpected. When you stop disappearing for others, the right people will come closer, not recoil. The morning after the wedding, I woke to sunlight pouring across my face, warm and stubborn. I blinked it away, sat up slowly, and checked my phone, half expecting a flood of apologies or maybe angry texts. But what I found instead stopped me cold. "Rachel, you deserved so much better. I know I have a lot to earn back. I just want to start. Can I take you to lunch?" I stared at the screen, feeling the hollow in my chest where anger used to live. I wasn't sure I could forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way she hoped. But I could tell she meant it. And maybe that mattered more than anything. Then there was Daniel. He texted too, but his message was shorter, simpler, and somehow heavier. "Daniel, you okay?" I read it over and over, not because I didn't understand it, but because it was the first time someone had asked me that without needing something in return, and I didn't know how to answer. I told him I was still figuring that out. He replied, "Take your time. I'll be here." That night, I lay in bed replaying the reception like a dream I couldn't quite wake from. The moment Daniel walked off stage, the silence after his words, Amelia's exit, Rachel's tears, my own heart, finally unclenching, after years of tightening itself around disappointment. But even now, part of me wondered, was it really over? The answer came a week later. I was back at work, teaching an after-school art class for second graders. It was a small job, humble, quiet, but I loved it. There was something sacred in the way kids created. They weren't afraid of messes or failure. They just moved color around until it felt right. I was wiping finger paint off a table when a shadow passed across the window. A moment later, the classroom door opened, and there he was. Daniel, still handsome in that effortless flannel shirt and soft eyes kind of way. But now there was a tiredness around him, a heaviness, like someone who had climbed out of a storm and was still learning to stand. "Hey," he said softly. I blinked. "Hi. What are you doing here?" He stepped in slowly, not presumptuous, not dramatic. "I wanted to talk, if that's okay." I looked around at the empty room. Class just ended. I've got 10 minutes before cleanup. He nodded. That's enough. We sat on 2 small chairs, barely big enough for our knees. I glanced at him from the corner of my eye, but he didn't look nervous. He looked honest, and that scared me more than any apology. I just wanted to tell you, he began, that the wedding wasn't what I hoped it would be. Not just because of Amelia, but because it made me realize how blind I've been. I stayed quiet, waiting. I saw how they treated you, and it broke something in me. Because I've known you most of my life, Maya, and you've always been there for Rachel, for my parents, for every kid who scraped a knee at a birthday party. He exhaled. And I never once told you what that meant to me. I finally looked up. You don't owe me that. No, he said. But I owe it to myself. Because the truth is, I married the wrong person. And I think a part of me always knew it. But she fit the picture, the plan, the expectations. His eyes met mine, sharp and soft all at once. But when I saw how she treated you, how we all treated you, I realized I'd built a life that had no room for the people who mattered. Most, my heart twisted. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to be a rebound, a symbol, a rescue fantasy. I wanted to be real. Daniel, I whispered, you can't just walk out of your wedding and into something else. That's not fair, to me or to you. He nodded. I know. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed you to know. You were the most honest part of that day, and I see you now. He stood up, smiled faintly. I'll go. And he did. He left me sitting there in a room full of drying paint and toy brushes, and I cried harder than I had at the wedding. Because this time, I wasn't crying from pain. I was crying from being seen. Weeks passed. Rachel and I met for lunch. It was awkward at first, but honest. We cried, we laughed. She told me she'd broken things off with Amelia as a friend, too. I couldn't stand by her anymore, she said. Not after what she said about you. Not after I realized I became her. We started to rebuild, slowly, intentionally. Not out of nostalgia, but because some friendships deserve resurrection. And because forgiveness, when offered freely, changes everything. And Daniel? He didn't disappear. He sent small things, a copy of my favorite book, a playlist, a card on my birthday that just said, "You matter." We didn't date. We didn't fall into some romantic cliché. We just talked, walks, coffee, shared memories, new ones. And one night, as we stood beneath the fairy lights of a street festival, he looked at me and said, "No pressure, no timelines. Just, can I be in your life in whatever way you'll have me?" And I said yes. Not because I needed saving, but because I had already saved myself. The revenge? It didn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It came with rising, with saying no more, with being loved the way I always should have been, but starting with myself. And the best part? They called me the babysitter. But I was the story.